Hello, everyone. My name is Zak Lara, and I'm the Communications Manager at Veterans Legal Institute. A few weeks ago, I had the incredible privilege of sitting down with an amazing veteran, Jerry Hodges. Jerry was a World War II Tuskegee Airman and a true hero whose legacy left a profound impact on this country and just countless individuals who were able to hear his story. When I heard of Jerry's passing last week, I reflected deeply on how to honor him, and honestly, where it hit me the most was in the editing process. If you've ever worked on a creative project, you know how we often get caught up in crafting, this 15-second Instagram reel or creating something that just flashes and pops and, it doesn't tell the whole story. But for Jerry, I realized the best way I could honor him was to do as little editing as possible. Just let the story unfold exactly as he told it. The funny thing, sometimes we feel like we have all the time in the world, and other times we feel like we have none. We live in this paradox of time, which only reinforces the truth that every moment matters, every interaction matters. What we do in this life and who we choose to spend our time with or lend an ear to makes all the difference. I want the Hodges family to know that the time I spent with Jerry was one of the most meaningful interviews of my life, not just because I got to hear his incredible story, but because I also got to tell him mine, and he listened. Sometimes I think we forget the value of listening and the power of presence. And for 2 hours, Jerry and I sat and we talked and we laughed and we just enjoyed, the presence. And for a man who had lived, so much life to tell me that I've lived a lot of life, and I feel like I'm barely on my first chapter compared to everything that he's done with his life, was a true moment of connection. Jerry's story embodied all of that. So instead of creating this polished and flashing, refined product, I'm going to honor Jerry by keeping his interview as raw and unedited as possible. Think of it like a podcast where the interviewer speaks much less and the guest, who's the story that we all care about, does all the talking. And better yet, think of it as a conversation with your best friend, and where you're finally and fully present, listening, and giving them your ear and your heart. My hope is by watching this, we can truly all honor his service by simply listening and being present. Thank you. Excited to interview you today. Can you tell us a little about yourself? Tell us your name and who you served with.
My name is Jerry T. Hodges Jr. I was born in Memphis, Tennessee. I grew up in Arkansas, a place where during the time that I was growing up was rather restricted as far as Black people were concerned. I got out of Arkansas as soon as possible when I was 18 years old. When I caught a bus going to school, I said, goodbye, I won't be back. And I had heard of California. I didn't plan on living here, but I did want to come here to go to school. But after leaving Arkansas, I went to Hampton University in Virginia for 1 year. At that year, end of that year, I went into the military, into the Air Corps. There was no Air Force. The Air Corps was a part of the Army. And when I left Hampton, I went in there I had volunteered for flying training. At the beginning of the war, there were Black people were not permitted to fly. They didn't think that we had enough know-how or moxie or coordination or anything like that to handle the high-speed, complicated aircraft that we had to fly. During that time, there was President Roosevelt was convinced that they should at least give it an experiment. That was his wife and a number of other people that promoted it to him. So they decided, okay, we'll set up an experimental training center down in Tuskegee, Alabama. We know it's going to fail, so we just call it an experimental. They started training black pilots there at Moden Field, which was attached to Tuskegee University. And we would do the primary training there. Now, in training to become a airman at that time, you would have 4 sessions: primary, pre-flight, primary, basic, and advanced. Your pre-flight was at the Tuskegee base. Primary and basic and advanced was at the Tuskegee Air Force Base. I began training after basic training for the Army in Mississippi, which was, I think, 5 weeks or something like that. And then we would go to Tuskegee to start the training. I started the training in September of 1944. Pre-flight training at the base, primary at the university, and we moved to the university and lived there for the 5 weeks, and after that, back to the base. Now, in my training, and in the beginning, they had only white instructors in the upper grades of flying. At the primary base in Moden Field, only black instructors. When my class came through, which was near the end of the war, they had changed it somewhat, and then also introduced a few black instructors at Tuskegee. I had black instructors until I got into advanced training. In the advanced training, I had one of the few remaining white instructors at that time. He was a Southerner. He was prejudiced, but he was absolutely fair. He was very strict, disciplinarian, I guess that's the word. And when my class got into advance, I was assigned to him. The first day of flying, he said, "You cadets are my students, and you are going to be the first one to solo. If you don't, I'm going to wash you out myself," which meant termination of training. He was right. I did solo, and we were flying in advanced training the B-25 bomber, which was the same bomber that they had used to bomb Japan on the first over Japan flight. During these training periods was very good. In primary, like most of the students, I couldn't wait to get up there and do some aerobatics all by myself. And when I soloed in primary, the next day they gave me an airplane. I flew up to the area I was supposed to fly in, and I looked around, nobody around. I'm not supposed to do this, but I wanted to see what it was like. And first I did a loop-the-loop. I enjoyed that. They worked out all right. Then I started doing chandelles. That was when you flying along, dive, pick up speed, pull all the way over and go in the opposite direction. Very easy maneuver when you had the speed. During this period, I looked up and over in another area. I saw another student who apparently was just like me. He was doing vertical rolls. That is, diving, pick up, and turn 360 degrees, then level off. I looked at that. I can do that. And so I'm going to try it. I picked up, got altitude, dived to build up my airspeed, pulled the nose straight up in the air, and I started rolling around to finish my 360 degrees. At 180, she stopped going up and just sat there. And all my controls, nothing. And I was saying, oh, what am I going to do now? How did this happen? And then I remembered, they said, the PT-17 is the safest airplane flying. If you ever get into trouble, turn her loose. Just release it and let it go. So I released it, and it shuddered a little bit. Then the nose just fell over into what they call a hammerhead stall. I had never done stalls. That was the most exciting flight in primary. I got out of that safely. In advanced training, flying the B-25, after solo, we would get one low-level flight, and that was called a navigation flight. We would go from Tuskegee to another town, from that town to another town, and then return to the base. On my day of low flight maneuver, I was in an airplane with Captain Howard Ball and two other cadets. They didn't know, but Captain Ball is what, if he'd been on the ground, you would call him a hot rodder. But they flew around the course. They were up about 200 feet in the air. And he got bored. He was sitting up in the co-pilot's seat, almost going to sleep. Anyway, when we came back and I changed into the pilot's seat, I put that sucker right on the ground almost. My propellers was cutting the top of the cornfields I was flying over. And I remember Captain Ball, he woke up then, he got excited. He woke up and started watching what I was doing. We flew all around the course, about 20 feet, 25 feet off the ground, back to the base. And when we approached Tuskegee town, he looked at me and said, "Give it to me." And I did. And he headed to an area in where he and his family lived. Flying over there, he cut the power lines, and they were out of power for almost a day. Years later, I saw him and asked him, did he remember that flight? He said, yes, I did. And my wife hadn't forgiven me yet. It was really a good flight. From Tuskegee, I left there after serving a year after graduation, and I was working for Captain Ball then. Then I was transferred to Lockburn Air Base outside of Columbus, Ohio, with the group that was training for transfer to the Pacific Ocean. Now, remember, we are near the end of the war. We were flying up to 45 hours per week. We had night flights, navigation flights. On weekends, we would do air shows. And that was what we were doing. It had really just become a job. It wasn't exciting anymore. Just a job with a whole lot of hard work. And I did that until the end of the war. I also served on base, on the headquarters base organization, I guess you'd call it, where I was assistant statistical officer. And I had got that job when I was transferred to Lockburn under Colonel Davis. And I wanted the job because I had to decide, am I going to stay in this and make it a career, or am I going to do something else? Well, to assure that I would stay in there, when I got to Lockburn, I started looking for a job, and I got this one. And within a couple of months, I was the assistant statistical officer, the stat officer, retired, and I was in line for his job. Well, at that time, the war had ended. They had dropped a bomb, and the Air Force was now like reorganizing all of their units. And I had the option came up. I could get out, or I could apply for permanent commission, or I could re-enlist as a master sergeant. What to do? I'm at a crisis point in life. You either get out or you stay in. You either stay in at the same level or you reduced. I decided it's best I get out of service because I've been one person who always tried to be independent. I didn't like taking orders from somebody else. And if I had stayed in the Air Force, I could have handled that to a point, but I would have always been subject to rules and regulations from someone else. So I got out, came back to school, to college. In 1946, I was released December, and in the spring, I went back to Hampton one semester. I had applied to colleges in California for entry before I got out of service. And I was accepted at USC, University of Southern California Business School, which I was studying in Hampton. But I did the spring semester of 47 at Hampton, taking the classes that I knew were comparable to the classes at the USC for a freshman, for a sophomore, first year sophomore. Okay, September rolled around. I came to California, enrolling, and I registered for the courses that an upper sophomore student would take. Good. Except when I went to have it approved, after looking over my list and everything, the counselor said, well, I see you're registered for the right classes, except that, you know, you went to this little school on the East Coast there, and you may not be able to keep up with University of California's classes. I looked at this guy, he's trying to get me to start all over again. I'm in a hurry to get my career going and try to follow all the rules. No, sir. I will not start over. I am qualified according to your rules as an upper sophomore, and that's what I will do. So that was in it. And actually, I went on and completed my undergrad work in 2.5 years, which was good. From there, while I was going to school, I was working part-time with a public accountant. Then, when I graduated, I worked full-time with him for a little over a year, and I joined an insurance company, a casualty insurance company that had just been organized as the controller. Completely different type of accounting, but I picked up on it and I handled it really good. I stayed with that company for 13 years when it was absorbed by another company from Arkansas. And they explained to me, you know, we can't hire you in Arkansas, but we have a company up in Pennsylvania, a life company that we can give you a job. And I said, okay, I'll take that. But I had to stay with my present employer until it was liquidated and then moved. And the closer it got to going to Pennsylvania, the more hesitant I was about learning. The whole thing is, I decided I didn't want any part of the East Coast. So I started my own CPA, public accounting course, organization. I built it from a zero income up to, I think, about $200,000 annually over the next 20 years. That was really exciting to build an organization with 8 or 10 employees in such a short period and for it to become successful. Along the way, I did some speculation in real estate. I bought a post office. I moved houses from one point to another. That came about accidentally. I was going hunting one night and looked up, and there was a house on the freeway moving along, which I had never seen before. And after that, I did a little study and found out how it was done. And then I said, okay, I'll try that. So I moved in my speculating. I guess I moved about 10, bought and moved about 10 houses, because that was right at the time that they were building the 10 freeway at another freeway. So, so the highway department would buy these properties. They would auction off the houses, and the people that would buy the house would move them to a lot that they had. Very expensive, and at that time, quite lucrative to do it. The first house that I moved was given to me. It was a house that I had lived in when I first got out of school and sold to a church. They wanted the lot. They gave it to me. I moved it. That worked out. All the houses after that worked out well until I got to the very last one. By then, all expenses involved around moving and replanting these houses had really become too expensive to continue. But that sort of brought me up to date. I sold the houses that I had and called myself retiring. I did quite well in the selling of my homes. And I'm out of it. That's what I'm doing now. One thing I want to experience I had during the time that I was buying these homes and selling them, there was one spot where they were auctioning off a house that I wanted to buy. And in buying them at these auctions, you had to compete with a group of three men that were at every auction. Three men. And I knew I couldn't compete against them at the auction. So I sent my wife over to compete. She got there and she was by herself. So one of these men came over and said, do you want to buy this house? They asked her. And she said, yes, I do. I want to buy it. They said, okay. So when the auction started, they made one bid. Then my wife bid it. And they didn't bid against her. They let her have it, which was the only way I could have gotten that house. It just shows it's good to, it's not what you know, but who you know throughout life. I've had many other situations like that.
What was one of your favorite takeaways from your time in military service?
Oh, military service.
What was one of your main things that you look back as a happy memory about it?
It really, I had one flight I called what did I call that? Let's see. We were supposed, I was on a flight to transfer students from Tuskegee to Phoenix, Phoenix, Arizona Air Base. These were single engine pilots. We were to take them over to Phoenix for gunnery training. Uh, almost forgotten. This flight was probably the most exciting. It was the most exciting I ever had. I was flying as co-pilot for a returnee from Italy called Smitty. Smitty was about 5'2", and he may have weighed 100 pounds with his parachute on. Being a 332nd fighter pilot that had been converted to multi-engine, he was a very conceited like all the rest of those guys. But he was good. And when we left Tuskegee, we had two options. One, we could fly an airway. Two, we could just cut on across the United States to our destination. Smitty decided he didn't want to follow the airway that had been set up for these cross-country flights. Following those, you'd either follow radio line, light line, a visual line. Also, the weather in the West was kind of bad, and we had to have an instrument clearance. We were assigned 8,000 feet as our altitude to fly across. And as I said, Smitty elected, we're going to just fly on straight across. Okay, we did. We took off, flew to Maxwell Field, turned left and headed for the west. We're in the weather. We can't see the ground. We were in the clouds and storm. All the way over Louisiana, we got one little peek at the ground, but then we kept on. Okay, so how do we know where we're going if you can't see? We used our instrument. We had a radio compass. We would take a reading of our compass to the station, draw a line on our map. 10 minutes later, we'd take another reading from that station or another one, draw a line across our map. Then we could tell how much correction we'd have to make. That way we got all the way across. We were in Texas. And looking out toward the horizon, I could see horizontal lightning. And I had been told, if you got a horizontal lightning, you are approaching it. If you got vertical lightning, you're passing it, you're leaving it. We called into Dallas and asked them about Love Field and asked them, could we get on to Phoenix, our destination? or not. And they said, oh, you should be able to do it. There are a few thunderclouds, but you should be able to do it. We kept on going. 5 minutes later, boom! It was like a baseball bat had hit us underneath, and the aircraft was rising swiftly up to 14,000 feet before we could even breathe good. I looked out and snow and ice was on the wings. My engine temperature dropped by about 80 degrees. We were really in danger. All this time I was pointing the nose down toward the ground, but we were still going up. I had flown into a thunderhead. Those thunderheads can go up to 30,000 feet. But at 14, I was able to get control again and start back down to our assigned altitude and head back. It's too late now to go to Phoenix, so we headed back to Love Field. We're going to spend the night there. Approaching Love Field, we called in. The tower called back and said, "We're having rain approaching, but come on, maybe we can get you through. I'll get you on the ground." We kept on. We got close to Love Field. He said, and lined up with an airway, with a runway, and headed down. A call said, "I'm sorry you can't land on that runway. We have 2 airplanes that's on it. Let me give you another one." They gave us another runway, and just as we got over it and lined up with it, rain. Now, wasn't a heavy rain, but at 180 miles an hour, a shower is like a hurricane. We got lined up, headed for the runway, and they started giving us these red lights, which means no, don't do it. We couldn't see the runway. Smitty took over and continued this downward flight. He told me to look out the side, and when you see the runway, let me know. Well, that was the only way I could see it, was looking over the side of it. And when we did, I pointed down. Smitty cut the engine, and he set that baby down so easy we hardly knew we were landing. That was all they talked about that night. I remember as we all were getting out of the airplane, the operations officer came flying out in his car. Who was flying this plane? He wanted to congratulate him. Who was flying this plane? And Smitty was just getting out. His parachute on his back was big as he was almost. And he said, "I'm the pilot who wants to know." the operations officer took one look at this black guy and they took off, leaving us out there in the rain. That was the most exciting.
If you had any messages for veterans now, for any service members now,
Oh, yes.
what would you
Yeah,
like to tell veterans now or service
yeah,
members
yeah,
now?
yeah, yeah. Uh, with service now, military service now, is not too bad. It's a good way for you to get started in life. It provides you now. You get a pretty decent salary, and the retirement uh, program is pretty good, and it allows you to do a career, retire at an early age, and have set aside a sizable sum to assist you in your final retirement. And retiring from military at an early age like that, you can even start another career and retire from it and end up eventually with two retirement programs plus your own personal. Remember, if you're going to get ahead, you've got to persevere. You've got to set your own goals and you have to work at it. But remember this, if you get into something as a career that you don't like, please don't stay in it. Go and find you another one. Because working in a career that you don't like is like being in prison. Whereas in a job, a career that you like, it's like going on vacation every day, which was my experience. I enjoyed all of my different careers, and I never even thought of changing once I got permanently programmed. Manhood, perseverance, and determination. Yes, sir.
I like that. I spoke this morning to that high school group I had mentioned, and I told them the same thing. I was like, I've met I've met some pretty skilled people at what they do, and they're unhappy. And I said I've met people who, they're not the most technically savvy or the best at it, but they love what they do. And I was like, I consider myself like not an expert, but I love what I do. And I was like, I would not want to go through life doing something where it's like it just makes you money, but you're miserable. And so I was trying to explain this to them because I told them, kind of my life story, and I was like, I think for me, it's more important to say that I have a life of purpose than I have a life of money. And I wanted them because they're they're in this class, and they're talking about all these great things they want to do with their cameras and everything, and I'm like, you'll get to a point when you are at the cross section of what you're good at and what you love doing, and you have enough to get by, and you're happy there. And I was like, that to me was a lot of my youth persevering to get to that point, but I would never want to do something I'm unhappy with.
Yeah, right.
And it was, I've had the same conversation with kids from different walks of life, and I tell them, if you can see it in your mind, you can hold it in your hands. And I was like, for me,
Yeah,
peace, happiness, and purpose are just the most important things to me. I was like, nowhere in there do you see me being rich. Nowhere do you see me in there being like the boss of a company. I was like, I don't have those aspirations. I just want to live my life knowing that I'm helping the community around me. My life
Yeah,
belongs to the
yeah.
community.
We're in the position I should be there interviewing you.
You know, I'm at the beginning steps of my journey. You know, you know, I feel like where you were talking about your story when you got out and started doing things with the CPA. I feel like I'm right there, and there's still so much more to do.
Yeah,
You know, and I feel like I'm still at the first. If life's a book, I feel like I'm at the beginning of my
yeah,
chapters. You know, in
yeah,
a lot of ways, and I think
yeah, yeah. And the thing is, along the way, you're going to meet people that help you,
mhm,
and you're going to meet other people that will attempt to harm you.
mhm.
You got to keep that in mind.
Yeah, I told the students this morning the power of networking, and I was like, but you know, I told them the importance of just little things like shaking somebody's hand, talking to people, looking them in their eye. But I also told them your work and you are a human resume. How people talk about you and how people see your work is so important. And I was like, also when you are meeting people and you hear how they work, you know, watch out for that because it's really important that you hear like, is this somebody that my values, my beliefs align with, or is this somebody who wants to, you know, is going to pull the rug out from underneath
That's
me,
right.
you
That's
know?
right.
And I
Yeah.
said, listen to how people talk about other people, you know, even like today, they were like, "Hey, can you go film this?" I'm like, "You guys, the first person you thought about was me to go do this." Absolutely. And I was telling them how even speaking at the school, the fact that your teacher met me one time and said, "Can you speak to my students?" I was like, "You want to surround yourself with your group, your crew, your squad, your circle with these people who want to do well and are thinking of it's not about me but we." You know, and I said, you know, watch out for the people who out there, and you know, they don't have your beliefs, they don't have your interest in mind, and they're not
Yeah.
trying to really help the community at large. I told them, you know, one of my things is I always invite friends or people I'm talking to come do a community service event with me,
Mhm.
and by their actions of how they act, like I've done feeding the homeless down on Skid Row. I've done, you know, delivering presents and food and cleaning street cleanups.
Right.
And I watch how people react and their word choice and how they treat other people when we're doing these events. And I'm like, okay, like, you know, if you're somebody that can speak with anybody and mesh in well here, then I know you're somebody who's aligned with me. But if you walk out there and you're mean, you're rude, people are trying to help and you're not helping them, if you're more concerned with other things, then you're clearly not somebody that I want in my circle. And that's okay. People come, people go. But I'm trying to find the people who want to stay. You know, so I was talking with those students about that this morning about, you know, just power of networking and finding your group.
Oh, that's
Where I
great.
work at, the woman who's in charge of the law firm, Antoinette, I met her about 6 years ago. So when I got out of the Marine Corps and I switched to the Army, I
Yeah.
met her and we took a selfie together. You know, like she was the first thing she said is, "Who are you and what do you do?" I said, I'm Zak. You know, I'm trying this filmmaking thing and doing photography." And she said, "Well, how can I help you?" Her first question wasn't like, "What do you want from me?" It's, "How can I help you?" And I said, "You know, I'm doing filmmaking." And she's like, "Would you like to do some interviews with my law firm of clients?" And you know, we started doing that, and I would sit down and listen and respond, and I think that was her also testing me. And I mean, I you know, I we did a few of those, and it just led to more and more work. And she was opening a door for me. She offered me a job. She said, "You know, I can't pay you what you're worth." And she's like, "That's why I've never hired you. I can't pay you what you're worth." She's like, "But if you work for me, I will never micromanage you. You can make your own hours." She's like, "But you will live a life where you are just happy and filled with purpose." And I
Oh
was like,
my.
I rented out my house in LA.
Oh my.
I moved to Orange County, and that was it. And I told the students this morning, I was like, you know, I've had large film projects where people are like, "Hey, do you want to go do this to make money more?" I'm like, no, like I am happy in this moment where God has placed me. where I am of service, I am of purpose, and this is where I'm supposed to be. And
Yeah.
I don't want to inject, like plans of like grandeur and money into a moment that I am in where I am being humbled and serving. And
Yeah.
I was like, that's it. And I was like, but I had to find that network by doing good things, and the universe had to link me up with them.
Yeah.
But I also tell them, you can't expect things right away. I look back and I connect the dots and think, wow, like I was here and I did this, I worked hard, I was doing this, and that opened the door here years later. So it's not always going to be instant, you know.
Okay.
Um, but this was a great interview. I appreciate your story. I really do, and I want you to know that I'm going to honor your story, and I want people to hear it. And
You know, whenever I do one of these, I after it's all over and I'm finished, and for a while afterwards, I really wonder, did I say everything I should have, or what I said, was it worth listening to? I hope I haven't disappointed you.
not at all.
Uh, and I really consider it my luck to have met you. I can tell you're headed for good things. You, you you understand life. And you're working for advancement. That's great. As long as you're doing it with something you like, that's even better. Yep.
Thank you for your time. Appreciate you.